All right, so this screencast is going to be all about lipids or fats and their functions in biological systems. So our essential question, what is the difference between a saturated and an unsaturated fat? And essentially, which one is better for you? So what are some biological functions of lipids? Primarily, lipids are used as an energy source. When we think of lipids, we think of fats. So you get lots of energy from fat. Phospholipids are your structural components of your cell membrane. Remember, they have the polar head and the nonpolar tail. We also have steroids and cholesterols as structural components in our cell membranes. Most of our hormones are fats. They're steroid hormones. They're critical intercellular messengers, so things like estrogen and progesterone and adrenaline, those are all hormones. And then dietary fat acts as a carrier of lipid-soluble vitamins into cells of the small intestine. So even if you're on a low-fat diet, you still have to have some fat. A lot of our minerals and vitamins won't dissolve unless we have some fat in our intestinal tract. So you can't be on a zero-fat diet. A lot of the lipid-soluble vitamins, vitamin A, E, D, and K, so we need a little bit of fat for them. So there's four main groups of lipids, classification of lipids. There's the fatty acids. They can be saturated or unsaturated. The glycerides, which are glycerol-containing lipids. We'll talk about those in a minute. The non-glyceride lipids, things like steroids and waxes. And then complex lipids, your lipoproteins. So when you think about cholesterol, these are going to be complex lipids. So let's do a little bit about the fatty acids. What's the difference between saturated and unsaturated? It's really just being full of hydrogens or not. A fatty acid is a long straight chain of carboxylic acids just bonded together. There's no branching. When we say when there's no branching, we call that a completely saturated fat. When there is branching or kinks in the chain, meaning it's missing hydrogens and so there's some double bonds in there, we say that's an unsaturated fat. So any fatty acid that cannot be synthesized by the body is called an essential fatty acid, like omega-3s or omega-6s. Those are essential fatty acids that you have to get from your diet. So you can make some you can't. And here's a classic picture of a saturated versus an unsaturated fat. The saturated fats, unsaturated fats. The double bonds are there because it's missing some hydrogens. So this is stearic acid, a typical saturated fatty acid, and here's oleic acid, a typical unsaturated fatty acid. Here's a whole list of kind of common saturated and unsaturated fatty acids. You don't really need to know any of these. It's just, here's some examples of some found in your body. So fats and oils. Fats are mainly come from animals, unless they're from fish, and they're generally solid at room temperature. These are the ones that aren't so good for you. Oils mainly come from plants and are liquid at room temperature, and they tend to be better for you. So in terms of saturated or unsaturated, which ones are better for you? These are the saturated fats. These are going to be solid at room temperature. These are not as good for you as what these are. Your body has a harder time digesting these, which is why they're healthier for you. So a steroid, a lot of times we think of, we're still dealing with carbon compounds, so you're still going to have these carbon rings. And this is how we tend to draw most of our steroids. So a carbon skeleton of a steroid nucleus. And then there's going to be components that are added onto that. So when we talk about steroids or hormones, this is kind of the basic structure of them. Cholesterol is another type of fat that you should all be very familiar with. You need cholesterol for your cell membranes. It is a precursor to bile and bile salts, so you do need bile to help with fat digestion. Male and female sex hormones we get from cholesterol, or we make from kind of the backbones of cholesterol, vitamin D, and then all of your adrenal cortical hormones, so all the ones that are secreted like by your kidneys or your adrenal glands. These unfortunately have been linked to the atherosclerosis, which is hardening of the arteries, can lead to heart disease and heart attacks. So some steroid examples, here's one, cholesterol. You see this basic structure, and then we just add different things to it. Here's cholesterol, here's testosterone, here's progesterone, Here's cortisone or cortisol, but these are just all steroids that have this basic component, this basic ring structure, and then some things added to them. Waxes are another type of fat. They protect the skin of plants and the fur of animals. There's carnauba, which is the Brazilian wax palm. There's beeswax. You have earwax. There's all sorts of different types of waxes, but they are generally used as water-bearing or waterproofing, water barriers or waterproofing materials. So here's the structure of them. Beeswax, whale oil, which can be burned for light. So complex lipids, these are the lipoproteins. These are the things that, as you get older, you might be more familiar with. These are the molecular complexes that are found in your blood plasma. Whenever you have your cholesterol checked, the bad cholesterol, that's what they're checking here, are the VLDLs, the LDLs, and the HDLs. So VLDL, it's very low density lipid. Those are made in the liver. They help transport lipids to your tissues, so you do need some of them. You don't want it to be zero. The LDLs are the low density lipoproteins. They carry cholesterol from the liver to tissues as well. This is the bad cholesterol, though. This is the cholesterol that gets lodged in your arteries. HGL is the high density lipoprotein. This is the good cholesterol. This number you want to be high, this number you want to be low. So they're also made in the liver. They scavenge excess cholesterol esters, so they can actually, the higher this number is, it can actually help to lower this number. This number gets high by diet and exercise. This number gets high by a bad diet and a lack of exercise. So here are kind of what these things look like in terms of the cholesterol molecules or the, within a cell. So you're looking at phospholipids. There's proteins in this cell membrane here. There's going to be cholesterols, triglycerides, which are also fats. And these are just going to be floating around in your plasma. And whenever you get your blood checked, your plasma lipoproteins checked, that's what they're going to tell you is how much you have of these floating around in your bloodstream. So here are some pictures of the very low density lipoproteins. Here's low density and here's high density. And you can see how the low density ones have more phospholipids and less protein. Those are not good for you. So you want more protein in the cell membrane. You want it to have a higher density. And so these ones right here are going to help to keep these ones at a lower number, which is what you want. So basic structure of biological membranes. We've already talked a little bit about phospholipids and you learned about it in biology, but each type of cell has a unique membrane composition with varying percentages of lipids, proteins, and some carbs. And we use the fluid mosaic model where it's not a solid structure. It is more fluid. It can be reactionary to things as it gets squished. That lipid bilayer can move around, and it's made of phospholipids. So the hydrophilic heads, which are the phosphate groups, and those like water, so they turn towards it, which is why they turn towards the water inside and outside the cell. And then the fatty acid tails, the hydrophobic fatty acid tails, they hang out on the inside. Away from the water, and that's what creates this kind of cell membrane layer, this bilayer. And then you also have, other molecules coming off of it. You've got other fats and proteins and cholesterols and stuff coming off the cell membrane. Most membranes require proteins to carry out their functions. The integral proteins are embedded in or extend through the membrane, so they have hydrophobic and hydrophilic parts. And then the peripheral proteins are bound to membranes primarily through interactions with integral proteins. So they're just held there. So we think about these are ones that are going to be showing to the inside and the outside, and these are the ones that might only stick to the inside or stick to the outside. So right here, this is a peripheral protein because it's not sticking to the inside and the outside. This one would be an integral protein because it's in both places. So they can stick to the inside or to the outside. And this one is a peripheral protein sticking inside. But these proteins all have different functions. Some are receptors, some are channels, some are markers used for identification. But here's kind of the basic structure of a cell membrane with the phospholipids. So that concludes the discussion about lipids.